The engagement hall fell silent the exact second Immaculate Ndlovu stepped through the gold-trimmed doors with 4 children at her side. Champagne glasses froze in mid-air. Cameras turned. Tendai Mbeki's smile died on the stage. The smallest girl clung to Immaculate's hand. The oldest boy stared straight at Tendai with wounded fury in his eyes. Then Immaculate stopped in the center of the ballroom and said loud enough for every guest to hear, "I did not come back to beg. I came back because one of your children may die, and because the lie that destroyed our marriage was never mine." Tendai went cold, because the 4 children looking at him had his face. "Before we go deeper, tell me this: if the person you divorced returned years later with children you never knew existed, would you believe her or think it was one more lie? And wherever you're watching from, drop your country and your local time in the comments. If you love emotional, powerful stories like this, subscribe and stay with us for the rest of the journey. Before the lies, before the silence, before 4 children became living proof of a truth buried under years of pride, there had been love. Not the polished kind that posed for magazines or smiled beneath crystal chandeliers, not the kind that came wrapped in family approval, old money, or strategic alliances. What Tendai Mbeki and Immaculate Ndlovu had built in the beginning was rough, hungry, and real. It lived in cramped rooms with peeling paint. It survived on shared bread, borrowed bus fare, and the stubborn belief that one day their suffering would mean something. In those years, Johannesburg did not know Tendai's name. No one stood when he entered a room. No assistants rushed toward him with tablets and contracts. He was just a young man in cheap shirts and worn shoes, carrying too much ambition and not enough opportunity. He worked in a logistics office by day and studied market reports by night, chasing business ideas that failed almost as quickly as he could explain them. Immaculate was the only person who never laughed. She saw him when he had nothing to show for himself, but restless eyes and calloused hands. She was working double shifts then, first at a pharmacy counter and later doing bookkeeping for a neighborhood wholesaler. She came home exhausted, her feet aching, her fingers smelling of paper, ink, and medicine. But every night she still sat across from Tendai at their tiny table and listened as if his future were already visible to her. When his voice shook with doubt, hers did not. When his investors backed out, she sold her bracelets. When his first business partner disappeared with money, she did not call him foolish. She called him wounded and told him wounds could heal if he stopped touching them like trophies. "You are not a failure because someone lied to you," she told him once, placing a chipped cup of tea into his hands. "You become a failure only if you let bitterness teach you how to live." Tendai never forgot those words. Or rather, he thought he never would. The first small warehouse they rented smelled of dust-damp cardboard and old engine oil. Half the lights did not work. The roof leaked when it rained. Their desk was a cracked wooden table rescued from a junk dealer. But when Tendai stood in the middle of that miserable space and imagined trucks, contracts, and supply chains moving under his command, Immaculate stood beside him and imagined it too. She did more than encourage him. She built with him. She kept the records when he was too tired to think clearly. She called vendors. She corrected invoices. She learned enough about freight delays and customs paperwork to save him from mistakes that would have ruined them. When his temper flared, she calmed him. When his pride tempted him into reckless deals, she pulled him back to caution. And when success finally began to arrive, not all at once, but in careful, hard-earned pieces, she was the one who made sure it did not crush the goodness that had made him worth loving in the first place. For a while their marriage felt blessed. They would lie awake in the dark, planning the house they would buy one day. Not a mansion, not then. Just a home with clean windows, a quiet yard, and enough room for children to run. Immaculate wanted a mango tree if the climate allowed it. Tendai wanted a study with shelves full of books to make up for the years when he had owned almost none. Sometimes they laughed over names for future sons and daughters. Sometimes they argued over whether love alone could survive success. Immaculate always said no. Love needs humility, she told him one Sunday afternoon as they folded laundry together. The moment success makes you too proud to ask questions, too proud to listen, or too proud to apologize, love begins to starve. He kissed her forehead and told her she worried too much. Perhaps she did. Or perhaps she simply understood danger earlier than he did, because success came faster after that. A transport contract with a mining firm changed everything. Then another. Then a supermarket chain gave Tendai's company a regional supply deal that pushed him into rooms he had once only dreamed of entering. Suddenly his name mattered. His phone never stopped ringing. Men who had once dismissed him now clapped him on the back and called him brother. Women with expensive smiles lingered in conversations too long. Invitations began arriving from families who had ignored him when he was poor. Among them was the Mbeki family's inner circle of social allies, powerful, polished people who spoke of legacy as if ordinary pain had never entered their homes. And with them came pressure. Pressure to look the part, pressure to marry appropriately, pressure to stop bringing his rough past into rooms designed for smoother stories. Immaculate felt the shift before Tendai admitted it. It started in small ways. A delayed answer, a distracted nod, a dinner missed because a client dinner mattered more. He still loved her, that much was true, but love was no longer the loudest voice in his life. Ego was growing, exhaustion was growing. The need to be accepted by people who had never suffered beside him was growing too. Then came Mama Thandi. Tendai's mother had not approved of Immaculate even in the early days, though poverty had forced her into silence. She had wanted a daughter-in-law from a respected family, a woman who would lift their status, not mirror their struggle. But once Tendai became successful, Mama Thandi's old disapproval found new strength. She did not attack openly at first. She was too strategic for that. Instead, she asked innocent questions with poisonous timing. Was Immaculate still suited to this new life? Did she know how to stand beside a man of status? Would she embarrass the family in front of investors? Tendai brushed those comments aside at first. Yet they landed, not because he believed them immediately, but because pride had made him more vulnerable than love had made him loyal. Then another woman entered the edges of their life, Naledi Dlamini. She was elegant in the way wealthy daughters are often taught to be measured. Voice-calculated warmth, expensive restraint. She appeared through charity events, business dinners, and mutual acquaintances. She never crossed obvious lines. She never flirted where it could be named. She only positioned herself near Tendai's growing world and let others do the talking for her. She understands corporate life, someone would say. She comes from a family that could open doors, another would murmur. Some women know how to grow with power, Mama Thandi remarked one evening, just casually enough to sound harmless. Immaculate heard all of it. Still she did not beg. She did not compete. She did not perform desperation to keep her place. She tried to talk to her husband. One rainy night, when the city lights outside their apartment blurred across the glass, she sat waiting for Tendai until nearly midnight. When he finally walked in, tired and irritated, she went straight to him. "We are changing," she said softly. He loosened his tie. "That happens." "No," she replied. "I mean us." He sighed the way busy men sigh when they fear emotion will cost them time. "Immaculate, not tonight." "That is exactly the problem," she said. "Every difficult truth becomes not tonight." He turned then, impatience sharpening his features. "I am doing all of this for us." Her eyes held his. "Then why does it feel like I am losing you to it?" For a moment he almost reached for her. Almost. But his phone rang. He checked the screen. A client. Another opportunity. Another urgent matter that could not wait. By the time he ended the call, the silence between them had changed shape. It was no longer the silence of two tired people trying to survive. It was the silence of something cracking. The first real blow came 3 weeks later. A photograph arrived anonymously. It was blurry, taken at night outside a private guest house on the northern edge of the city. But not too blurry. Never blurry enough to dismiss. In the image, Immaculate appeared to be stepping out of a car with a man whose hand was pressed against her lower back in intimate familiarity. Her face was turned partly away, but the dress was hers. The date stamp matched a night she had told Tendai she was helping a sick co-worker. He stared at the image until anger replaced oxygen. When he confronted her, she went pale, but not with guilt. With shock. "What is this?" she asked, taking the photo from his hand. "You tell me." "It's not what you think. The oldest sentence in every betrayal. The weakest shield against a wound already bleeding." Tendai laughed then, but there was no humor in it. "Of course it isn't." Immaculate's voice trembled not from shame, but from the horror of realizing someone had laid a trap around her and sprung it perfectly. "I can explain." "Then explain." And she tried. She told him the man was the husband of a co-worker she had been helping after a medical emergency. She told him the guest house had been the nearest place to collect emergency cash from a relative staying there. She told him she had lied only because she knew how it would look, and because she was tired of his mother turning every harmless thing into suspicion. Some of it was messy, some of it came out in the wrong order. Some of it sounded too complicated to survive a wounded man's need for a clean answer. Tendai heard only fragments. Lied. Another man. At night. Guest house. The poison had entered him before the explanation ever began. And once poison enters pride, it rarely leaves without destruction. That night he slept in another room. The next morning he left before sunrise. And in the space between those two silences, the first crack in their marriage became a wound wide enough for other hands to reach in and tear it open. By the time the ballroom doors closed behind Immaculate and Ndlovu, the engagement celebration was no longer a celebration. It was a spectacle held together by silk gold and the frantic discipline of rich people pretending they were not witnessing a disaster. The chandeliers still burned overhead. The string quartet still sat frozen on the small platform near the stage bows, motionless above their instruments. A fountain of champagne continued to spill in glittering tears at the far end of the hall, absurdly elegant beside the ruin that had just stepped into the room. No one spoke above a whisper now, but whispers were everywhere. Tendai Mbeki stood at the center of the stage, in a suit tailored so sharply it had once made him feel invincible. Now it felt like armor that no longer fit. Every eye in the room was on him. Investors, politicians, society women, business rivals pretending concern while enjoying every second. And beside him, Naledi Dlamini stood like a sculpted figure of offended grace. One hand still holding the stem of her untouched champagne glass, the other tense at her side. Immaculate did not look at Naledi. She looked only at Tendai. That was what unsettled him first. If she had come back to create chaos, he thought there should have been more rage in her face, more accusation, more desperation. But what he saw there was something heavier and far more difficult to dismiss. Exhaustion layered over resolve, the kind of resolve that comes only after a person has run out of pride, out of fear, and almost out of time. The 4 children beside her stood in a line, too imperfect to be planned and too striking to ignore. The smallest, a little girl in a pale yellow dress, pressed herself against Immaculate's hip fingers, curled tightly around her mother's hand. Her eyes were wide and confused, but not crying. She had the stillness of a child who had learned early that adults could become dangerous without warning. Next to her stood another girl, perhaps 8, with 2 neat braids and a serious, watchful face. She held herself straighter than most children her age. Her gaze moved around the ballroom with uncomfortable intelligence, measuring exits' expressions, threats. Then there was a younger boy, thin and restless. His lips parted as if he were breathing through nervous pain. His hand kept drifting toward his side beneath his jacket. He tried to hide the motion, but Tendai noticed it immediately without understanding why. And at the end stood the oldest, perhaps 11 or 12. A boy with Tendai's jaw, Tendai's brow, Tendai's impossible habit of standing as if he were already bracing for impact. But where Tendai's face had once carried ambition, this boy's carried accusation. The child looked at him as if he had already been judged and found guilty. The resemblance hit Tendai so hard he almost stepped back. It was not one feature, not one coincidence. It was a collection of familiar things arranged in living flesh. The shape of the cheekbones, the set of the mouth, the eyes, God, the eyes. A murmur rippled across the room as other people saw it too. Naledi found her voice first. "This is obscene," she said, not to Immaculate, but to the room as if public opinion were still something she could direct. Security should have removed her at the door. No one moved. Immaculate reached into the worn leather satchel hanging from her shoulder and pulled out a thick brown envelope. It was old, its corners softened by handling the paper slightly bent from moisture and time. She held it with both hands for a second, like something heavier than paper had weight inside it. Then she set it down on a nearby table, beneath a flower arrangement worth more than the monthly rent of most families in the city. "I did not come to fight you," she said quietly. Her voice did not shake. That unsettled Tendai more than shouting would have. He descended from the stage one measured step at a time, aware that if he ran at her, the crowd would devour it. If he embraced her, the room would explode. So he chose distance. Measured cold distance. "What exactly did you come to do?" he asked. His voice sounded steady. Only he knew it was not. The youngest girl flinched at the hardness in his tone. Immaculate's fingers tightened around the child's hand. Tendai noticed that, too. "I came," Immaculate said, "because I had no choice left." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Naledi gave a small, humorless laugh. "There is always a choice," she said. "You chose this moment because you wanted maximum damage." Still Immaculate did not look at her. "I chose this moment," she said, eyes still on Tendai, "because your office would not let me in. Your lawyers ignored me. Your mother's people followed me twice, and my son's doctor told me I no longer had the luxury of waiting for decency." The room changed at that. Not much, just a breath, a tilt. But Tendai felt it. The social mood had begun to shift from scandal to curiosity. That was dangerous. He needed control back. "If this is about money," he said, "you should have come through proper channels." The oldest boy made a sound, then small, sharp, almost a laugh, but too bitter to be one. Tendai's eyes snapped to him. Immaculate heard it too. She laid a calming hand on the boy's shoulder. "It is not about money," she said. "Then what is it about?" For one long second she said nothing. Then the thin younger boy beside the braided girl winced and bent slightly at the waist. It was quick, subtle, almost hidden. But not hidden from his mother. Immaculate crouched immediately, one hand under his chin, the other pressing gently against his back. "Breathe, baby," she whispered. Slowly. The braided girl reached into a small backpack and took out a plastic water bottle without being asked. The oldest boy scanned the room, not panicked, just ready. Ready in the way children should never have to be ready. Tendai stared. This was not performance. Whatever else was happening, that much was real. The boy took 2 shallow breaths and straightened again, embarrassed at being noticed. He did not look at Tendai. He kept his gaze on the polished floor. Something cold slid under Tendai's ribs. "What is wrong with him?" he asked before he could stop himself. Immaculate rose slowly. The silence in the ballroom sharpened until even the clink of ice in a glass across the room sounded intrusive. "That," she said, "is why I'm here." Naledi stepped forward now, finally abandoning the statue act. "This is manipulative." Tendai barely heard her. He was staring at the boy again, at the unnatural paleness beneath his dark skin, at the way one hand remained close to his side, at the careful way he stood conserving strength. The child lifted his head at last, and Tendai felt the impact like a strike to the chest. Because in those eyes, those dark, guarded, angry eyes, he saw not only himself, but memory. A memory of his own face at that age, after his father had failed to come home 3 nights in a row. The same effort not to hope. The same refusal to beg. "What is his name?" Tendai asked. Immaculate's expression flickered. Pain crossed it, not because the question was cruel, but because it came too late. "His name is Kamo," she said, "and he is your son." A sound moved through the room, half gasp, half whisper. Naledi set down her glass too hard. "This has gone far enough." But Tendai was no longer listening to her. He looked from Kamo to the oldest boy, then to the girls. Each face gave back a different fragment of him, rearranged through Immaculate's softness, through time, through absence. A life he had not known. A life that had happened somewhere else without him. His instinct was fury. Fury at the humiliation. Fury at being cornered. Fury at the implication that he had been blind or deceived or both. Fury at Immaculate for standing here and detonating the careful structure of his present life. But beneath that fury, something far more dangerous had begun to move. Recognition. No, not belief. He was not ready for belief. But recognition. "How long have you planned this?" he asked. Immaculate's mouth parted slightly, disbelief mingling with exhaustion. "Planned, yes," he said, harsher now because he hated the uncertainty inside himself. "This entrance, this performance, the children, the accusations. How long?" Her face changed then, not dramatically, just enough for him to see the wound land. "You still think I would drag 4 children through a room like this for theatre?" she asked. "I think Tendai said that after what happened between us, I have reason to question every word out of your mouth." The oldest boy stepped forward at that. "Mama," he said low and tight, "we should go." Immaculate reached for him, but he had already squared his shoulders. There were no tears in his eyes, only a kind of young rage so disciplined it became dignity. "You don't have to beg him," the boy said. The words struck the room like an open hand. Tendai felt them more than heard them. Immaculate closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. "I am not begging." She turned back to Tendai and placed one hand over the old envelope on the table. "In here," she said, "are hospital records letters I wrote and never got answered. Copies of payments, names, dates, and the truth about what happened after the divorce. I carried these papers for years because I kept hoping I would never need them." Her gaze flicked to Kamo. "I was wrong." Tendai's throat tightened. "What do you mean?" For the first time since entering the ballroom, Immaculate's voice nearly broke. "I mean, your son needs surgery," she said. "I mean, the specialists say he may not survive much longer without it. I mean, I tried every decent way to reach you before I came here. And I mean that if I let pride or shame stop me now, then Kamo pays for our past with his life." The words landed and stayed. No music, no whisper, no clinking glass. Only silence. Then, with devastating calm, Immaculate added the sentence that changed everything in Tendai's body. "And if you still think I came for money, open the envelope. Because what will shock you most is not that these children are yours. It is who made sure you never knew." Tendai did not open the envelope in the ballroom. For one suspended moment, it seemed as though he might. His hand even moved toward it. The room leaned inward with him. Guests, rivals, gossip, hungry donors, women who would retell this night over brunch for years. But Tendai stopped himself just before his fingers touched the paper. He still had enough pride left to understand one thing: If the truth inside that envelope exploded here in front of cameras and crystal, and people who collected scandal, like jewelry, he would lose all control over what happened next. Not here, he said. Naledi let out a breath that sounded almost like victory. Finally, some sense. But Tendai's eyes did not leave Immaculate's face. "Come with me," he said. Naledi's head snapped toward him. "Tendai?" He did not answer her. Immaculate hesitated only long enough to glance at the children. The oldest boy stiffened immediately, suspicion flaring across his face. "We're not splitting up," he said. His tone was protective, not childish. Too practiced. Too quick. Tendai looked at him more carefully. The boy had Immaculate's caution, but his defiance was pure mbeki. The realization irritated him and unsettled him in equal measure. "No one is splitting you up," Tendai said, though his voice came out colder than he intended. The boy's expression did not soften. Immaculate crouched beside her children and spoke in a low voice. Tendai could not hear the words, but he could see the effect. The younger girl held tighter to her mother's arm. The braided girl stood even straighter. Kamo pressed one hand to his side again, trying to hide another wave of pain. The oldest boy looked from Immaculate to Tendai, as if weighing whether this man was a danger or merely a disappointment. Then Immaculate rose. "They stay with me," she said. Tendai nodded once. "Fine." He turned to one of his security men near the side entrance. "Clear the West Lounge. No one comes in unless I say so." Naledi stepped in front of him before he could move away. "You cannot be serious. Move, Naledi." Her face changed, only slightly. But Tendai knew her well enough to see the crack under the polished calm. This was not just anger. This was fear. And because it was fear, it made him pause. "Why are you afraid of a conversation?" he asked quietly. Naledi's eyes sharpened. "I am afraid of manipulation. I am afraid of a woman who vanishes for years and then appears at your engagement with children and accusations. I am afraid of the fact that everyone in this room can see you are already letting emotion replace judgment." Before Tendai could answer, Immaculate spoke. "No," she said softly. "You are afraid the lie is old enough to have roots, but not strong enough to survive daylight." The silence that followed was vicious. Naledi's mouth tightened. "You should be careful." Immaculate met her gaze for the first time that night. "I was careful. That is why your plans lasted as long as they did." Tendai felt something shift again, deep and unpleasant. Immaculate had always spoken plainly, but never recklessly. If she was making that kind of accusation now, either desperation had broken her caution, or she knew exactly what she was saying. He did not let the confrontation grow. "Enough," he said. Then he led them out. The West Lounge was a private room reserved for high-level guests who needed quiet away from the main event. It was lined with dark wood muted artwork and expensive furniture chosen to look tasteful rather than extravagant. A city of gold lights shimmered beyond the tall windows. On any other night it would have felt like power. Tonight it felt like a courtroom waiting for testimony. The children entered first, slowly alert to everything. The little one stayed close to Immaculate. The braided girl guided Kamo toward the sofa with efficient tenderness. The oldest boy remained standing until his mother sat down. Only then did he take a position near the armrest, still watching Tendai like a guard dog who had learned human speech. Tendai remained near the table in the center of the room. The envelope lay between him and Immaculate like a buried weapon. For a few seconds no one spoke. Then Kamo sucked in a shallow breath and winced again. Tendai looked at him. Really looked. The boy's lips had gone slightly dry. There was a dull grayness under his eyes. Even seated, he held his body carefully conserving energy, without understanding that an adult who had spent years reading boardrooms could also read pain. "How bad is it?" Tendai asked. Immaculate answered immediately. "Bad enough that I stopped caring who saw me walk into that hall." The words hit him with more force than accusation would have. "What does he have?" She opened the satchel again, but this time, instead of taking out another paper, she pulled free a folded hospital wristband, a set of scan images in a clear sleeve, and a typed letter stamped by a specialist clinic in Durban. Tendai did not touch them yet. "Kamo has a congenital vascular condition," she said. "It was missed when he was small because we never had consistent access to specialists. Last year he started fainting. Then the pain came. Then the scans." Her voice remained controlled, but her fingers tightened around the edges of the letter. "They said surgery might correct it if done in time. They also said if we waited too long—" Her voice stopped. The braided girl looked down. The smallest girl curled into Immaculate's side. The oldest boy's jaw locked so hard, Tendai thought it might crack. "How long?" Tendai asked. "Months," Immaculate said. "Maybe less." The room seemed to narrow. Tendai looked at Kamo again. "His son," she had said. "Your son. No." He could not let language outrun proof. "Not yet. You expect me to believe," he said carefully, "that you kept this from me for years and came only now because of a medical crisis." Immaculate held his gaze. "I expected nothing. I hoped. There is a difference." That was such a familiar answer, so precisely the kind she used to give, when he was being unfair, that it opened a seam in his composure before he could close it. He turned away and picked up the envelope. Inside were documents, copies, photographs, receipts, medical records, and several folded letters whose edges had softened from repeated handling. Some were official, some were painfully personal. The first document he unfolded was a maternity record from a Durban hospital dated 7 months after the divorce. Patient: Immaculate Ndlovu. Pregnancy, multiple gestation. Outcome: live birth quadruplets. His pulse kicked once hard and ugly against his throat. He looked up. Immaculate did not speak. He set that paper aside and opened the next. Neonatal summaries. 4 names, 4 weights, 4 stabilization notes, 1 line item circled in pen father not present. Then a different paper, a certified copy of a notice submitted to an old Johannesburg address, his old address informing him of birth and requesting contact regarding legal guardianship and paternity acknowledgement. Stamped attempted delivery. Returned recipient unavailable. His hands tightened around the page. "That address," he said slowly. "I had already moved from by then." "I know," said Immaculate. He lifted his eyes sharply. "Because I came to the new house too," she said. And then she reached into the satchel again and placed a second document before him. Visitor log copy gated Mbeki estate, signed and dated. Visitor denied entry. Reason family instruction. Tendai stared at the signature authorizing the refusal. Mama Thandi Mbeki. His mother. For a few seconds he forgot the children were in the room. "No," he said. The word came out low, automatic, unbelieving. Immaculate nodded once without triumph. "I came to tell you," she said. "I was still bleeding. I was exhausted. I had 4 babies at home, one of them in and out of respiratory distress, and I still came because I thought, whatever happened between us, you had a right to know." Her voice roughened on the last sentence. "Your mother met me at the gate before I could even step inside." A memory flashed through Tendai's mind. His mother, that season unusually tender, unusually attentive, bringing him food at the office, insisting he needed peace, telling him Immaculate had chosen her path, and he must stop humiliating himself by waiting for explanations from a woman who had already made her choice. He had thought it maternal concern. He had never asked what she knew. "She said you were fragile," Immaculate continued. "She said the divorce had almost broken you, and that if I truly cared about you, I would stop reopening wounds for selfish reasons." A humorless smile touched her mouth and vanished. Then she asked to see the babies. The oldest boy looked at his mother. He had heard parts of this story, perhaps, but not all of it. Tendai felt suddenly unable to breathe properly. She knew he asked. Immaculate's eyes shone, though no tears fell. She counted them. The braided girl lowered her face. Kamo shifted painfully on the sofa. The little one seemed too young to understand, but old enough to feel the grief in the air. Tendai looked back at the documents with a hand that no longer felt steady. Beneath the visitor log was a letter in his mother's handwriting, not addressed to him, addressed to Immaculate. He recognized the elegant loops instantly. With growing dread, he opened it. The letter was short, calculated, cold. It said Tendai was finally rising into the life he deserved. It said scandal, illegitimate timing, and emotional blackmail would destroy his future. It said if Immaculate had any remaining dignity, she would disappear and let him become the man he was meant to be. It said that if she forced herself back into his life with those children, powerful people would make sure Tendai lost contracts, investors, and his place in society before he ever had a chance to secure it. At the bottom, one line had been underlined twice. If you love him, you will leave before you ruin him. Tendai lowered the letter very slowly. His skin had gone cold. No, he whispered again, but this time it no longer meant disbelief. It meant the beginning of guilt. Immaculate watched him without softness. Not cruelty, just the exhausted honesty of someone who had carried too much alone. I still tried to reach you after that, she said. I wrote. I called old numbers. I left messages with people who swore they would tell you. Then Naledi came. Tendai's head lifted. The room tightened. Immaculate's voice dropped lower. She visited me 2 weeks later. Alone. Elegant. Calm. She said she admired sacrifice. A hollow laugh almost escaped her. She said your future depended on stability, not scandal. She said investors were already watching your personal life. She said a woman with 4 newborn babies and a public story could destroy everything you had built. The oldest boy's eyes darkened. He had definitely not heard this part before. She brought an envelope of cash, Immaculate said. Not enough to save us. Just enough to insult me. When I refused, she leaned close and told me something I have never forgotten. Tendai's throat tightened. What Immaculate did not blink. She said, he already believes you betrayed him. All I have to do now is make sure he never gets a reason to doubt it. The words landed like a blade sliding quietly between ribs. Tendai did not move. He could hear the city beyond the glass. A faint horn, distant traffic, life continuing as if this room were not splitting open. Then Kamo let out another small, involuntary sound of pain, and in that sound, all abstraction died. The scandal, the pride, the impossible timeline, the ruined engagement, the buried marriage, none of it was abstract anymore. A boy was suffering in front of him, a boy who might be his son, a boy who had been kept from him not by chance, not by misunderstanding alone, but by hands close enough to wear family rings and smile at his table. Tendai looked at Immaculate and saw, perhaps for the first time that night, not the woman who had returned to wreck his carefully managed life, but the woman who had been forced to carry the consequences of other people's lies until the consequences began to threaten a child. What else, he asked quietly, did they do? Immaculate did not answer Tendai's question immediately. For a moment she simply looked at him, as if deciding whether he had earned the next layer of truth, or whether truth, like everything else in her life, would once again become a burden placed in the wrong hands. The city lights beyond the windows flickered across her face, catching the shadows beneath her eyes, the years of strain no powder could hide. Then she sat down slowly on the sofa beside Kamo. The little girl in the yellow dress climbed into her lap without asking. The braided girl shifted closer to Kamo, making space without words. The oldest boy remained standing, one shoulder angled toward the room, the other toward his mother and siblings. He had positioned himself there so naturally that Tendai felt a fresh wave of discomfort. That was a protector's stance, a father's stance, and the child wearing it had learned it too early. They did not stop with threats, Immaculate said at last. Threats are for people who still believe they have choices. Tendai stayed where he was, the envelope open in front of him, his mother's letter like a stain across the polished table. He wanted to sit, but sitting felt too much like surrender, and he was not yet sure what he was surrendering to, guilt, fury, or grief. So tell me, he said. Immaculate exhaled once and began. The first year after the birth nearly destroyed her. The quadruplets had arrived 7 weeks early after a pregnancy, so punishing that by the end she could no longer stand for more than a few minutes without dizziness crawling up the back of her neck. The doctors in Durban had moved quickly, voices clipped and efficient hands full of urgency. 4 babies, 4 incubators, 4 fragile beginnings. She had not even been allowed to hold all of them on the first day. The smallest had struggled to breathe. One of the girls had feeding problems. Kamo, though strong at birth, had spent his first nights with unexplained circulatory instability that doctors dismissed as a preterm complication. The oldest boy, Sibusiso, had screamed until his face darkened purple, and then fallen suddenly quiet, as if fury had exhausted him before life had fully begun. I named him that because I needed comfort, Immaculate said softly, glancing toward the boy. Sibusiso did not look at her, but Tendai saw the muscle in his jaw move. The girls Tendai asked before he could stop himself. Immaculate's eyes returned to him. The older one is Thandiwe. The little one is Zuri. The names settled into the room with strange intimacy. These children had existed for years beyond his knowledge, and now their names were crossing into him one by one like keys he had no right to hold. And Kamo, he asked quietly. Immaculate's hand went to the boy's shoulder. Kamohele. I shortened it because when he was small, he could never say the full thing. Kamo gave the faintest flicker of a smile gone, almost before it formed. Tendai felt that vanish too, and hated that it mattered. Immaculate continued. She had left the hospital with 4 babies, a body still torn open by birth, and less money than most people in Tendai's ballroom had probably spent on tonight's flowers. The small savings she had scraped together before delivery disappeared within weeks. Formula, medicine, rent, transport, emergency pediatric visits. When one baby cried, another woke. When 2 finally slept, one needed feeding. There were nights she sat on the floor with a child at each side, and one across her lap, too tired to tell if she was praying or delirious. She never returned to Johannesburg, not because she did not think of it. She thought of it constantly. But Mama Thandi's letter had landed with surgical precision. Tendai's career was climbing violently then. One public scandal, one whisper of abandoned wife, returns with 4 infants. One rumor that he had fathered children amid divorce chaos, and the business world around him, hungry class, conscious, cruelly moral when convenient, would have turned the story into a weapon. Immaculate knew that because women always learned the shape of society's hypocrisy before men did. So you believed them? Tendai said. Immaculate's gaze sharpened. No. I believed you were vulnerable to them. The distinction hurt more. She rented 2 rooms behind an old tailor's shop in a crowded neighborhood near the Durban train line. The walls sweated in summer. The wiring was bad. The landlord repaired nothing unless she stood in his doorway until shame forced movement from him. Still, it was a roof. A beginning. She took bookkeeping jobs from local traders when the babies slept. Later, she sorted pharmacy stock at night. Later still, she cleaned a private clinic after hours, because clinics paid slightly better, and she could sometimes ask questions about medicine without being laughed out of the room. There were women who helped, a widow named Mama Ifua from the room next door who watched the babies while Immaculate worked, a taxi driver who sometimes carried them without charging the full fare, a nurse with tired eyes who showed her how to monitor breathing and fevers at home. Strangers had held up corners of her life when family and law had failed. But every time I tried to become stable, Immaculate said something happened. She reached into the satchel again and brought out a thin stack of papers clipped together with rusting metal. Job applications, rejection letters, a rental agreement abruptly cancelled, school intake forms delayed, a denied credit request. Tendai frowned. This proves hardship, not interference. Immaculate slid one of the letters free and handed it to him. It was from a wholesale accounting office where she had nearly secured full-time work. The rejection looked standard until his eyes reached the note attached to the back. Added by hand after a phone verification call. Reference flagged. Candidate tied to reputational concerns. Avoid hire. His eyes lifted. I never used your surname after the divorce, Immaculate said. But sometimes people from Johannesburg knew enough. Sometimes they knew more than they should. Who flagged you? I could never prove it. Her voice flattened. But twice I traced it back to calls placed from companies linked to the Dlamini Family Foundation. Naledi. The name passed silently through the room, but it landed everywhere. Sibusiso's face hardened. Thandiwe lowered her eyes. Kamo leaned back as if fatigue were pulling him under. Tendai felt heat move through his body, now different from shame. Cleaner, more dangerous. She monitored you, he asked. Immaculate gave a hollow smile. Monitored is a polite word. I would call it containment. She told him about the years that followed. When the children were small, she kept them away from cameras, from unnecessary forms, from anyone too curious. She never posted photos. She never spoke the name Mbeki aloud outside locked rooms. The children learned early that questions about their father had no simple answers. At first, she said he was far away. Then she said he had made mistakes. Then, when Sibusiso got old enough to hear other children talk about fathers who attended school events and fixed leaking taps and carried sleeping daughters to bed, he stopped asking what kind of man Tendai was and started asking what kind of man could disappear. I never told them you abandoned them, Immaculate said. Sibusiso looked away, ashamed and angry at once. You didn't have to. The words struck Tendai harder than any accusation from an adult. Immaculate's voice remained steady, but pain was braided all through it now. Do you know what children do when there is silence where a father should be? They build stories. Some make him into a hero because hope is easier than grief. Some make him into a monster because anger is easier than shame. She looked at Sibusiso, then at Kamo. And some make him into a question that never stops hurting. Tendai had no answer. Nor that was worthy of sound. Kamo shifted again, slower this time. His face had taken on that careful stillness of someone trying not to worsen pain by acknowledging it. Tendai noticed Thandiwe quietly unscrew the water bottle and pass it to him. Zuri rested her head against Immaculate's chest thumb, tucked against her mouth in a half-abandoned childhood habit. Sibusiso remained alert, but his eyes flicked constantly toward Kamo. This family had built itself around survival. Without him. The next blow in Immaculate's story came when Kamo was 9. He had fainted during a school assembly, just collapsed under the sun with no warning. The local clinic blamed dehydration. Then it happened again while carrying groceries. Then again at night when he woke, sweating and clutching his side, as if something inside him were tightening by invisible hands. Immaculate spent money she did not have on scans and referrals and transport. Each answer led to another queue, another form, another delay. Specialists were far. Appointments were expensive. One doctor told her to stop imagining worst-case scenarios. Another suggested growing pains. Another looked at the scans twice and fell silent in a way that frightened her more than any spoken diagnosis. Finally, a vascular surgeon in Durban ordered more imaging and confirmed what the others had missed. Kamo's condition was rare, treatable in the right hands, deadly if neglected. At first I thought Immaculate said that I would manage it the way I managed everything else. One bill at a time, one sacrifice at a time. But then they gave me the estimate. She handed him a printed quote from a specialist surgical team. Even Tendai, who now signed transactions large enough to shift entire departments, felt the number land with force. For Immaculate, it was impossible. I sold what I could, she said. I borrowed. I took advances. I moved us again to save rent. I cut everything that was not survival. Then I went back through old papers, looking for anything, any legal path, any proof, any reason someone would finally listen. Her eyes moved to the envelope. That is when I realized something else had been done. She placed a final document in front of him, a hospital records request response. The original birth file had been altered, father field removed, emergency contact pages missing, one page bearing a replacement date from years later, another carrying a signature stamp from a records officer who had died before that update was supposedly made. Tendai stared at it. Someone had not simply hidden the truth. Someone had maintained the lie. For years. They did not trust time to erase us, Immaculate said. So they kept erasing us by hand. The words left the room colder than before. Tendai ran a hand over his face. Everything in him wanted to reject the scale of it. People did cruel things every day, yes. Families lied, lovers betrayed. But this required planning. Money. Repetition. A sustained belief that other human lives could be organized like inconvenient paperwork. His mother's face rose in his mind. Naledi's poised smile. Their voices so different now, joined by one terrible possibility. "How long ago did you try to reach me this last time?" he asked. Immaculate answered without hesitation. 3 months ago. Then 6 weeks ago. Then last week. I received nothing. I know, she said. That is why I stopped trying to be polite. Sibusiso finally spoke again, his voice low and edged. Mama wanted to come sooner. I told her you wouldn't care. Kamo glanced at him, pained by more than illness now. Thandiwe closed her eyes briefly. Zuri stayed tucked against Immaculate, but Tendai saw her fingers twist into the fabric of her mother's dress. Immaculate looked at her eldest son with quiet warning. Sibu. But the boy did not withdraw. I'm just telling the truth, he said. Then he turned to Tendai fully, and all the old grief in a child's body sharpened into something almost unbearable. If you had cared enough to look for her after the divorce, maybe you would have found us before my brother got sick. No one breathed. Tendai could have defended himself. He could have talked about deception, false evidence, the trap of years. He could have explained how thoroughly he had believed Immaculate betrayed him. But in that moment, faced with a boy who had grown up under the weight of consequences, Tendai never carried explanation, sounded too close to excuse. So he said nothing. And the silence this time belonged to guilt. Sibusiso's words did not fade when the room went quiet. They stayed there sharp and living like broken glass no one could step around. If you had cared enough to look for her after the divorce, maybe you would have found us before my brother got sick. Tendai stood with one hand braced against the table, his pulse thudding hard in his throat. No boardroom, no hostile acquisition, no public scandal had ever left him feeling this exposed. In those worlds, power still obeyed rules. You could prepare for attack. You could hire specialists. You could bury weakness under language numbers and confidence. But there was no defense against a child telling the truth as he had experienced it. And the worst part was that the boy was not entirely wrong. Tendai had been deceived, yes. Lied to, manipulated, isolated from facts that should have reached him. But after the divorce, once the anger hardened inside him, he had chosen the version of events that hurt him most cleanly. Immaculate had betrayed him. She had left. She had made her choice. It was a terrible story, but it was simple. Simplicity had allowed him to survive. He had never asked whether survival built on bitterness might still be cowardice. I did look, he said at last, though even to himself the words sounded thin. Sibusiso let out a bitter breath through his nose. Not hard enough, Sibu Immaculate said quietly. But the boy had crossed the line between caution and stored pain now. Years had been waiting for an opening, and openings like this did not come often. You want to know what looking hard enough would have been? He asked Tendai. Showing up somewhere, asking someone who didn't work for you. Going past what people told you because maybe the woman you claimed to love deserved one more question. Immaculate rose so quickly that Zuri slid from her lap with a startled movement. Thandi, we caught the little girl before she stumbled. That is enough, Immaculate said. Sibusiso's face flushed darkly, but he said no more. He turned away and folded his arms across his chest. The posture made him look older, though not in the way children dream of being older. It made him look tired. Tendai swallowed once. Hard. He could have answered. He could have said that love under betrayal becomes something deformed and humiliated, that every rumor in those years had seemed to confirm the worst, that his mother had pressed salt into every wound until doubt itself felt ridiculous. He could have said he had seen the photo, heard the whispers, watched Immaculate struggle to explain a night that had arrived wrapped in suspicion. He could have said that once a proud man believes he has been made a fool, he will often cling to the insult rather than admit uncertainty. But none of that would matter to a boy who had watched his brother weaken. So Tendai let the silence accuse him. Then he turned back to the papers. Show me everything he said. Immaculate hesitated. Everything. Yes. She looked at him carefully. You may not like what you find. That stopped being relevant hours ago. For the first time that night, something like grim respect passed through her expression. She crossed to the table and began sorting the documents into separate piles with efficient hands. Medical records, delivery attempts, bank transfers, written notes, employment issues, copies of communications. There was no chaos to it, no melodrama. She had organized her suffering into evidence because evidence was the only language powerful people respected once they had decided your pain was exaggerated. Tendai noticed the condition of the papers unfolded, refolded, carried, protected. Not the careless bundle of a manipulator improvising a lie, but the archive of someone who had been forced to prove her own life again and again. He picked up the stack related to contact attempts. There were letters addressed to old offices, to a business address he had not used in years, to the Mbeki estate, to a legal firm that had represented him in the divorce. Some bore postmarks, some had courier receipts, some had been returned unopened. One had been signed for by a receptionist from his former headquarters. Tendai's brow furrowed. This one was delivered. Immaculate nodded. 3 years ago. He unfolded the attached note. It was brief, painfully restrained. Tendai, I do not know whether this will reach you. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for truth to be given a chance before time makes that impossible. No demand, no accusation, no mention of children in the line he could see. Just that plea for a chance. What happened to it, he asked. I never heard back. Tendai stared at the signature block from his former office. Then memory moved. There had been an operations assistant that year, careful, efficient, invisible in the way competent staff often became invisible to men too occupied with themselves. A woman who had resigned suddenly after a conflict with Naledi over confidential correspondence. At the time, Tendai had barely registered it. He had been in Nairobi negotiating a regional expansion. He looked up sharply. Did anyone from my office ever contact you? He asked. Immaculate reached into the satchel and produced a small, folded paper torn from a notebook. A name. A number. A note written in hurried pen. She said I should warn you. Some of your messages are being intercepted. I cannot talk long. Be careful. No signature. Immaculate said. The number stopped working after that. Tendai's stomach tightened. Naledi again. Not proof, not yet, but the shape of her hand appeared everywhere now, like perfume lingering after a room had been left. He moved to the employment documents next. A call log summary showed repeated inquiries to places that had nearly hired Immaculate. 2 calls same week, both routed through organizations tied loosely enough to the Dlamini family that an outsider might dismiss the link as coincidence. But coincidence, Tendai knew, was often just deliberate action diluted across enough distance to seem accidental. Then he found the first truly ugly detail. One of the documents was a copy of a rental complaint filed against Immaculate by a former landlord. It accused her of immoral conduct disturbance and concealing household composition. The complaint had nearly cost her housing at a time when the children were still small. Attached to it was a handwritten note from the landlord admitting months later that he had exaggerated after pressure from important people who asked whether he wanted future licensing problems. Tendai's hand went still. "They tried to make you homeless," he said. Immaculate's mouth thinned. "Not tried. For 6 weeks they succeeded." The words landed heavily. She told him about that winter. The second building had been better than the first 2 bedrooms, a courtyard with cracked cement, enough light for the children to draw by the window in the afternoons. Then the complaint came. Then the threats. Then the landlord changed. Not all at once, just enough to become colder, less willing to fix things quicker, to mention rules. Finally, he told her there had been too many complaints, and she had to leave. She packed 4 children in 3 days. "There was mold in the place we moved to," she said. Kamo's breathing got worse that season. Zuri had nightmares because rats scratched in the ceiling. Thandiwe spoke for the first time in several minutes, her voice quiet and precise. Mama put rolled towels under the door so they wouldn't come inside. Everyone looked at her. The girl lowered her eyes at once, as if regretting the interruption. But Tendai could not stop staring. Her tone contained no drama, only memory. Children who narrate hardship calmly are children who have had too much practice. "You remember that?" he asked gently. Thandiwe gave the smallest nod. Sibusiso answered for her, still not looking at Tendai. "She remembers everything." Kamo shifted fatigue, flattening his expression. The strain of being upright was beginning to show more clearly now. Tendai moved instinctively toward the sofa, then stopped, unsure whether concern from him would be welcomed or treated like insult. Immaculate noticed the hesitation. "He needs to lie back for a few minutes," she said, and guided Kamo into a more comfortable position. Thandiwe slipped a folded cardigan behind his head. Zuri stroked his sleeve with solemn little fingers. Sibusiso stood closer without appearing to. The choreography of them struck Tendai with bruising force. This was how families formed in hardship, through unspoken systems, practiced care roles adopted without discussion. He was looking at a machine built to survive him, and perhaps built because of him. "What about the hospital records?" he asked, his voice rougher now. Immaculate returned to the table and handed him a thinner file. The alteration trail was partial, but enough to be poisonous. Original pages had been removed from the archived birth record. Replacement scans had been inserted years later. The father field had been blanked. Emergency contact sections redacted. A clerk's notation indicated a privacy request, but the signature attached to the request belonged to an administrative officer who, according to the death certificate clipped behind it, had died 11 months before the request was supposedly filed. Tendai stared in disgust. Who had access? Hospital staff? Legal intermediaries? Anyone who knew what to buy and who to pressure? He exhaled slowly. "Dr. Kofi." Immaculate's eyes sharpened. "You remember him?" Of course he remembered. Kofi Mensah had once floated around the edges of Mbeki family events, smooth, ambitious, too eager to make himself useful. A physician with private clinic links and a hunger for wealthy patrons. Tendai had never liked him. But disliking a man is not the same as imagining he would help falsify medical records. "He was close to my mother for a while," Tendai said. "Fundraising committees, health initiatives. She trusted him, Immaculate gave him a look that carried no sympathy. Your mother trusted anyone who could make inconvenient truths disappear politely. That struck because it was true. Tendai reached for the water on the sideboard, poured a glass, then another. His hand shook just enough to irritate him. He passed one to Immaculate without comment. She took it after a moment. "Why didn't you go to the police?" he asked. A dry laugh escaped her, small and defeated. "And say what?" "That a rich family blocked my messages and altered records I could not access. That a man with power believed I betrayed him, and the people around him used that belief to erase me. Do you know what proof costs when you are poor? Do you know how many women are told to come back with something more concrete, while the concrete is being buried by people who can afford shovels?" He had no answer to that, either. Outside, beyond the lounge doors, the engagement hall was still humming under the pressure of suspended scandal. He could imagine the guests whispering, calling drivers, checking their phones for leaks. The life he had known until tonight was already cracking in public. Yet inside this room that seemed less important by the minute, because the deeper horror was becoming clear. This was not only a story about a marriage destroyed by lies, it was a story about how easily power could recruit silence. Receptionists, landlords, clerks, social allies, family. Each one moving a small piece, each one able to tell themselves they were only following instructions, protecting stability, respecting privacy. And under that mountain of small pieces, a woman and 4 children had nearly disappeared. Tendai set down the last document and looked at Immaculate directly. "Who else knows?" he asked. Her answer came without pause. "One person who may still be willing to speak. Bekizizwe Kumalo." The name jolted something in him. The old estate manager, a man who had served the Mbeki household for decades, then retired abruptly 2 years after the divorce. Tendai frowned. Beki Immaculate nodded. "He saw me the day your mother turned me away." The room went still again. Tendai remembered Bekizizwe as disciplined, discreet, impossible to rattle. If he had witnessed that day and said nothing, then either he had been silenced or he had carried guilt of his own. "Why didn't he come forward?" Tendai asked. Immaculate's expression dimmed. Because he was told if he spoke, his son would lose his scholarship and his wife would lose her clinic post. She let that sink in. "Power does not need monsters everywhere, Tendai. It only needs enough frightened people." He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, Sibusiso was watching him again. Not with hatred this time, with wary assessment. As if the boy were asking himself whether this man would finally do something, or simply absorb the truth and find a way to survive it without changing. Tendai understood that look. He had earned it. "Where is Bekizizwe now?" he asked. Immaculate told him. Tendai glanced at the clock on the wall. It was late. The city had crossed fully into night. His engagement had collapsed in all but form. His mother was somewhere outside this room, perhaps already building explanations. Naledi was certainly doing the same. Every instinct trained into him by wealth, reputation, and business survival told him to move carefully. But another instinct, older, angrier, less polished, had begun to wake. He looked at Carmo pale against the sofa cushion, then at the papers, then at Immaculate. And when he spoke, his voice had changed. "Tonight," he said, "I'm going to find out who thought they could erase my children and still keep my loyalty." Tendai did not leave the West Lounge immediately. For several seconds after he spoke, no one moved. The promise hung in the room with a force that felt almost physical. It was the first thing he had said that night, which sounded less like reaction and more like decision. Not confusion, not wounded pride, not a man scrambling to control a scandal. A decision. Immaculate studied him with guarded stillness. She had known this version of Tendai once, the man who, when cornered by injustice, became quiet in the most dangerous way. Back when they were poor, that quiet had frightened dishonest suppliers, lazy clerks, and one landlord who tried to keep their deposit by pretending paperwork had gone missing. Tendai at his best was not loud. He was relentless. But years of wealth had buried that man under Polish ego and distance. Now for the first time in a long time she could see him resurfacing. Sibusiso saw it too, though he did not trust it. People say things when they're guilty. The boy said, his voice low and flat. That doesn't mean they do them. Immaculate gave him a warning glance, but Tendai lifted a hand slightly. No, he said. Let him speak. Sibusiso held his gaze with a steadiness that would have impressed Tendai in any other circumstance. You don't get to become our father because you finally got shocked in a nice room. The words hit hard because they were meant to. Tendai nodded once. You're right. That answer unsettled the boy more than anger would have. Sibusiso's expression flickered. He had expected denial, perhaps command, not agreement. Tendai continued his eyes on the child even as the words scorched his own pride. I don't get to become anything just because I found out the truth. I haven't earned that. Silence widened around them. Kamo shifted weakly on the sofa, breaking the tension. Thandiwe adjusted the cardigan beneath his head again. Zuri, sensing something solemn without understanding all of it, wrapped both arms around Immaculate's waist and pressed her cheek into her mother's side. Immaculate's hand rested protectively on the little girl's hair. We should take him back, she said quietly, nodding toward Kamo. He's tired. Tendai turned to the child. The instinct to order a doctor, a driver, a private suite, and 10 solutions at once surged through him, but he stopped himself. For years he had not been there. He did not know yet what comfort from him would feel like to them. Rescue offered too quickly by an absent man could feel a lot like ownership. Instead he asked, Where are you staying? Immaculate hesitated. That hesitation told him more than the answer would have. Not somewhere good enough, he said. Her chin lifted slightly. We are safe. That is not what I asked. No, she replied, but it is what matters first. He let the rebuke stand. She had earned the right to be difficult with him, more than difficult. Still he pressed. If Kamo's condition is that serious, I need to know where he is being treated, which specialist signed this estimate, and what access he has if something happens tonight. Immaculate heard the shift in his tone. Not command. Responsibility trying to form itself before permission had been granted. It stirred something dangerous in her chest hope, and she did not trust hope yet. She named the modest guest house in Rosebank, where they were staying temporarily, then gave him the name of the specialist clinic in Durban and the local physician who had been monitoring Kamo during the trip. Tendai listened without interrupting, storing every detail. When she finished, he nodded toward the papers. These stay with me tonight. Sibusiso stepped forward instantly. No. Immaculate placed a hand lightly against his arm. Sibu. No, Mama. We leave those here, they disappear. Tendai felt the accusation as a deserved blow. He looked at the boy and said, You have my word, they won't. Sibusiso's laugh was soft and merciless. That sounds expensive. For a brief second, Tendai almost smiled. Not because the remark was funny, but because it was sharp, alive, painfully familiar. The child had his bite. Then the recognition twisted into grief. Immaculate watched the exchange and seemed to reach a decision of her own. She removed several documents from the main stack, keeping originals of Kamo's current medical records and copies of the most sensitive pages. The rest she pushed toward Tendai. You can have copies of everything she said, not the originals. He accepted that without argument. Fair. She gathered the children. What happened next pierced him more deeply than the accusations had, not because it was dramatic, because it was ordinary. Thandiwe packed the water bottle and cardigan. Zuri helped solemn and sleepy. Sibusiso checked Kamo's face before helping him to his feet. Kamo tried to insist he could walk on his own. Sibusiso ignored him and positioned himself close enough to catch him if his legs failed. They had done this before. Many times. Tendai stood aside to let them pass, feeling the shape of his absence in every efficient movement they made without him. At the door, Immaculate stopped. She did not turn fully around, only enough to look back over one shoulder. "If you are going to start this," she said, "do not start it like a businessman protecting assets." Tendai met her gaze. "Start it like a man who finally understands what it cost other people for him to remain comfortable." Then she left with the children. The door closed softly behind them, and Tendai was alone. For a long moment he remained motionless in the center of the lounge, listening to the silence they left behind. The room smelled faintly of expensive wood polish, spilled water, and the perfume Naledi had worn earlier. That scent now felt poisonous. He looked at the stack of documents again. Then he picked up his phone. His first call was to his chief of security. "I want every camera feed from tonight preserved," he said. "No deletions, no edits. Lock the server and give access only to me." "Yes, sir. My mother is not to leave the building yet." A beat of surprise. "Sir, you heard me." He ended the call before questions could form. The second call was to his legal advisor, a woman named Amina, who had once warned him years ago that family influence inside a company could become corruption with a softer face. He had listened politely then and done nothing. Tonight he did not waste her time. "I need you at the Grand Regent immediately," he said. "It's after 11. I know." Something in his voice made her drop the resistance. What happened? A delayed crime. He hung up before she could ask more. The third call took longer to place because his hands, for the first time in years, were not entirely steady. Bekizizwe Kumalo answered on the fifth ring. His voice was older, roughened by retirement and caution. "Hello? It's Tendai." A pause. A long one. Then very quietly I was wondering how many more years it would take. The words entered Tendai like ice. "You knew," he said. "I knew enough." "Then why?" Not on the phone, Bekizizwe cut in. His voice had changed, too tightening around fear long practiced into obedience. "If you are finally ready to hear what was done in your house, come alone." Tendai's jaw flexed. "Give me the address." The old man did. After the call ended, Tendai stood very still. So it was true. Not just documents, not just altered files and returned letters and the ghostly fingerprints of interference. A witness from inside his own home had been living all these years with whatever he had seen. A witness who had expected this day. That knowledge carried its own humiliation. Tendai left the West Lounge and stepped back into the engagement hall. The atmosphere had changed from scandal to tension, preserved under crystal. Guests were pretending to mingle, but no one was enjoying themselves. Clusters of whispered conversation broke apart the instant he looked their way. Society women lowered their glasses. Men checked their expressions and failed. A few people had already left, which meant the story was spreading beyond the room. Good, he thought suddenly. Let it spread. Naledi stood near the stage, speaking to two donors with the composed concern of a woman managing a regrettable interruption. When she saw him, she excused herself and came toward him in measured steps. Beautiful, controlled, dangerous in the way elegant lies often are. "Tendai," she said softly, reaching for his arm. "You look exhausted. Come upstairs. We can deal with this in the morning." He did not let her touch him. A flicker of alarm crossed her face before she smoothed it away. "In the morning?" he asked. "Yes. Nothing good happens when people act in anger." He stared at her. Years rearranged themselves in his mind while he looked into her face. Small conveniences, well-timed reassurances, messages that never reached him. Her effortless closeness to his mother. The ways she had always seemed to appear just after moments of conflict, offering calm while subtly steering the meaning of what had happened. How long? He asked. Naledi's brow furrowed delicately. I don't know what you mean. How long have you been managing what I'm allowed to know? She smiled then, a tiny, incredulous thing designed to make him feel unreasonable. You are upset. That woman has clearly come prepared to... That woman has a son who may die. The sentence cracked harder than he intended. Several nearby guests turned. Naledi lowered her voice. Do not do this publicly. Publicly, Tendai said. You mean the way my life has been manipulated privately for years? Her pupils shifted. Not much. Enough. There it was again. Fear. Before she could answer, another figure approached from the far side of the hall. Mama Thandi Mbeki. She moved with the old, elegant authority of a woman who had built her entire identity on never being seen out of control. Pearls at her throat. Silver woven neatly into her hair. Every inch the matriarch of a respected family. But Tendai had known her since childhood. He could see the tension in the set of her shoulders. My son, she said, her voice warm enough for an audience. This has gone far enough. Your guests are distressed. Tendai looked at her. Not at the pearls, not at the posture, at the woman herself. He thought of the visitor log, the letter, the sentence underlined twice. If you love him, you will leave before you ruin him. A slow, terrible clarity came over him. All evening he had been moving through shock. Now shock was beginning to harden into judgment. He took one step toward his mother. You're right, he said. Relief flashed too quickly across her face. Then he finished each word precise enough to cut. It has gone on far enough. And tonight, before this night ends, I am going to hear exactly what you thought gave you the right to steal my children. The ballroom went silent all over again. No one moved after Tendai said it. The ballroom, already bruised by scandal, seemed to fold inward on itself. Every whisper died. Even the servers near the side walls froze with silver trays suspended in their hands, eyes lowered but ears open. The silence was so complete that the soft hiss of the champagne fountain at the far end of the hall sounded obscene. Mama Thandi's face did not collapse. She had too much training, too much pride, too many years of public control for that. But something in her expression hardened into a shape Tendai had seen only once before when he was 15, and she had discovered his father's gambling debts could no longer be hidden from the bank. It was the face she wore when she decided survival mattered more than tenderness. Naledi recovered first. This is exactly why private matters should remain private, she said, her tone soft and chastising, as though she were the only adult left in a room full of emotional children. Guests are here. Investors are here. The press will hear of this by morning. Whatever confusion that woman has brought, it does not need to become a public execution. Tendai turned toward her slowly. Confusion, he repeated. Naledi held his gaze. Yes, confusion. Documents can be fabricated. Stories can be rehearsed. People in desperate situations do desperate things. Careful, Tendai said. The words were quiet, but something in them made even nearby guests step back. Mama Thandi moved in then, laying one manicured hand lightly against her son's sleeve, in a gesture designed to look maternal, steadying, innocent. Tendai looked at it and felt the memory of that visitor log burn behind his eyes. My son, she said, not here. He removed her hand. Not roughly. That would have been easier. Worse, perhaps? He removed it with deliberate calm, as if refusing contact from a stranger. I agree, he said. Not here. Relief flashed across Naledi's face. Then he continued louder now, just enough for the nearest cluster of guests to hear clearly. That is why I am ending this engagement tonight. The room shattered without sound, first mouths parting, shoulders jerking, hands tightening around glasses. Then sound returned all at once in gasps, Murmurs the scrape of a chair somewhere near the donor's table. Naledi's mask finally cracked. What Tendai did not raise his voice again. He did not need to. This engagement is over. Several phones lifted discreetly. A politician near the stage turned away as though not wanting to witness it, and yet angled himself for a better view. One of Naledi's aunts made a choked little sound. The quartet remained frozen, as though movement itself had become dangerous. Naledi stared at Tendai as if she no longer recognized the language he was speaking. "You are humiliated," she said, low and furious. "You are reacting. You will regret making permanent decisions in front of people who would love to see you destroy yourself." Tendai's expression did not change. "Then let them watch." That answer landed harder than shouting would have. Mama Thandi stepped closer, voice suddenly sharpened under its social polish. "Tendai, think carefully." "No," he said, and turned to face her fully. "That is what I am finally doing." For one long second, mother and son looked at each other without performance. The crowd disappeared. The ballroom disappeared. There remained only history. Everything she had built into him, everything he had mistaken for care, because it came wrapped in sacrifice and authority. Then he said quietly enough that only those nearest could hear. "Did you count them?" Mama Thandi's eyes changed. Just a fraction. But it was enough. Tendai felt the answer before she gave it. "I don't know what poison that woman fed you in there," she said. "Did you count them?" he repeated. She did not respond. That silence condemned her more completely than denial could have. Naledi stepped between them, whether to protect Mama Thandi or herself. Tendai no longer knew. "This is madness. You are taking the word of a bitter ex-wife over your own family." "My family?" Tendai asked. The bitterness in his voice was new, stripped of style. "You mean the family that saw 4 newborn children and decided their existence was inconvenient?" "We protected you," Mama Thandi snapped. There it was. Not apology, not shock, not even a clean lie. "We protected you." The room tilted. Tendai looked at her as if she had struck him in public. In some ways she had. From what he asked. From ruin, she said. And now all the old conviction had entered her voice, making it stronger instead of softer. From scandal. From chaos. From the kind of woman who would drag you backward when your future had finally opened. Around them, people were no longer pretending not to hear. Tendai became aware of Amina, his legal advisor, stepping quietly into the hall from a side entrance. She had arrived without fanfare, taken one look at the room, and stayed still. Good. Let her listen. Mama Thandi continued too far inside her own justification to stop. You were vulnerable then. Emotional. Angry. Your business was fragile. Investors were watching every step you took. One wrong story, one hint of domestic disgrace, one woman appearing with children after a scandalous divorce, and everything could have collapsed. Everything Tendai said. Or the image you wanted. She drew herself up. Do not speak to me as if I have not sacrificed for you. The old weapon, the old currency, debt disguised as love. I am speaking, Tendai said to the woman who saw my children and hid them. Naledi cut in before Mama Thandi could answer. You don't know they're yours? That made him turn to her. And if they are not, he asked, explain the records, explain the letters, explain the messages, explain why you were at her door after the birth. For the first time since the confrontation began, Naledi had no prepared line ready enough to use. I went, she said carefully, because your mother asked me to check whether the situation was real. A dangerous half-truth. Tendai could hear it. And then I saw a woman already determined to use motherhood as leverage. The disgust that moved through him surprised even him with its purity. You really thought he said that if you dressed cruelty in respectable language it would become wisdom. Naledi's cheeks flushed, but she kept her tone cool. I thought you deserved a life not ruled by disorder. Amina stepped closer now, quiet but unmistakably present. Tendai did not look at her, but he knew she was there. Good, he said. Then you won't object to answering questions with counsel present. Naledi went still. Mama Thandi saw the danger too. You are turning a family disagreement into a legal circus. Tendai laughed then once without amusement. No. You did that when you altered medical records and interfered with legal notifications. That landed in the room like lit fuel. Several people actually recoiled. Mama Thandi's face blanched. Mind your accusations. Amina spoke for the first time. Her voice was calm, exact. Mrs. Mbeki, with respect, if there is evidence of document tampering, interception of correspondence, coercion, and suppression of paternity disclosure. This is no longer a family disagreement. The word coercion changed the air, because it gave structure to what had happened. It moved the thing from gossip into offense. Naledi turned on Tendai. You brought a lawyer into this. I brought truth into it. The lawyer just arrived on time. For a second, Naledi looked almost frightened enough to drop the performance entirely. Then instinct saved her. She glanced around the room, recalculated. The audience softened her eyes and let pain enter her face. So that's it, she asked. Years together, and you believe a stranger's paper trail over the woman who stood beside you. Tendai stared at her. He almost pitied how predictable that line was. Almost. You never stood beside me, he said. You stood near power and waited for me to confuse proximity with loyalty. That ended her. Not externally, not fully. But Tendai saw the hit land where vanity lived. Mama Thandi drew breath to speak again, but another voice cut across the hall before she could. Because it was true. Everyone turned. Bekizizwe Kumalo stood near the entrance to the ballroom. No one had seen him arrive. He wore a clean but old-fashioned dark suit, the kind a careful man kept for funerals and formal occasions long after fashion moved on. He looked thinner than Tendai remembered, older too, but not weaker. If anything, age had burned the fear from his features and left only fatigue and resolve. Tendai stared. Beki. The old man gave a small nod. Then his gaze moved to Mama Thandi. I told you one day God would grow tired of your silence being called dignity. A violent hush swept the room. Mama Thandi looked as if she had seen a ghost she was personally offended to find alive. You were told to stay out of this. Bekizizwe's expression did not change. I stayed out of it for too long. He walked forward with slow, measured steps. Each one seemed to strip another layer of protection from the lies that had ruled this family. When he stopped beside Tendai, he did not look at him first. He looked at the table, where the abandoned engagement flowers glowed under chandelier light, like something mocking and unnecessary. Then he spoke clearly enough for the room to hear. I was on gate duty the day Immaculate came to the house after the birth. Naledi closed her eyes briefly, a tiny involuntary gesture. Mama Thandi's jaw hardened. She was weak. Bekizizwe continued. She had come too soon after delivery. She asked to see you. She said she had tried letters and calls. Mrs. Mbeki met her before she could enter. His gaze shifted finally to Tendai. I heard the babies crying in the car. Something went through Tendai then, an image he had never lived but now could not escape. 4 infants in the heat, Immaculate still bleeding, still hoping. His mother walking down the drive, not to welcome but to stop. What did she say? Tendai asked. Bekizizwe answered without hesitation. She said your life was finally becoming respectable, and that no woman would be allowed to drag shame through the front gate. The room seemed to inhale as one body. Mama Thandi spoke sharply. You are a servant repeating fragments you did not understand. Bekizizwe turned toward her. Madame, I understood enough when I saw you take the letters from her hand and tear one open before your driver burned them. Tendai's vision whitened for a second. burned them. He heard Amina curse under her breath. Naledi stepped backward. Just one step, not enough for others to notice unless they were watching closely. Tendai noticed. "Did she come alone?" he asked Bekizizwe. "No," the old man said. Miss Dlamini arrived later. The hall erupted into overlapping whispers. Bekizizwe lifted a hand, not theatrically, just enough to steady his own voice. "I should have spoken then," he said. "I did not. I was afraid. My son's scholarship had just come through. My wife's clinic contract was under review. Mrs. Mbeki made it plain what would happen if I confused loyalty with courage." Tendai closed his eyes once. Not because he doubted him, because he didn't. When he opened them, he looked first at his mother, then at Naledi. Neither woman had language left that could clean what had just been made visible. And in that terrible, undeniable exposure, the balance of the night finally tipped. Not toward scandal, toward judgment. Judgment did not arrive with thunder. It arrived in fragments. A woman near the donor table quietly set down her champagne and walked away from Naledi as if distance itself were a moral statement. One of Mama Thandi's oldest social allies lowered her gaze and said nothing. A board member Tendai had known for years gave him a look that held both pity and approval, then turned to whisper to his wife. At the edge of the hall, two younger executives pretended to study their phones, but their faces carried the unmistakable expression of men realizing they were watching the end of one order and the beginning of another. For years, Mama Thandi had ruled through social certainty. She did not need to shout because she had spent a lifetime arranging which truths could survive in daylight. Naledi had learned from that school well. Grace, timing, implication, selective softness. Never lie badly when a polished half-truth can do more damage. But now the room had seen too much. The lies had not merely cracked. They had become ugly. And once elegance fails, cruelty begins to look exactly like what it is. Mama Thandi was the first to understand that silence would destroy her faster than speech. So she straightened, lifted her chin, and stepped fully into the judgment she had spent years postponing. "Yes," she said. The single word silenced the last of the murmurs. "Yes, I stopped her that day." Tendai stared at his mother as if some final thread inside him had just torn. Bekizizwe closed his eyes briefly. Naledi stood still as glass. Amina, already shifting into legal calculation, took one step closer but did not interrupt. Mama Thandi continued, every syllable sharpened by conviction. "I stopped her because someone had to. You were not thinking clearly. You were drowning in humiliation, rage, and distraction. Your company was fragile. Your reputation was fragile. You were still foolish enough to believe love would protect a man from consequences." Tendai's voice came low. "Consequences of what? Of choosing beneath your future." The words landed with the clean violence of a slap. Several guests physically flinched. Bekizizwe looked away in disgust. Tendai did not move, but something in his face changed so completely that for a second he looked like the poor young man he had once been. Harder, hungrier, stripped of polish. "Immaculate helped build everything I had," he said. Mama Thandi dismissed that with one movement of her hand. "She helped you survive struggle. That is not the same as helping you enter power." The sentence explained too much. It explained the contempt, the interference, the years of elegant sabotage. To Mama Thandi, suffering had value only until it could be exchanged for status. After that, anyone who remembered the old life too vividly became a threat. Naledi spoke next, perhaps because she sensed Mama Thandi's honesty was becoming dangerous even to herself. "It was never meant to go this far," she said quietly. Tendai turned to her. "Oh." She swallowed, and for the first time that night her perfection seemed humanly unstable. At first it was only supposed to be temporary. "Your mother believed the children would complicate everything. I believed." She stopped. Say it, Tendai said. Naledi held his gaze and made the choice that proud people often make when there is no honorable way out. She told the truth, but only the portion that still preserved her vanity. I believed you deserved a partner who understood the life you were entering. No, Tendai said. You believed you deserved my life. Naledi's nostrils flared slightly. And what if I did? Do you think ambition is a sin only when a woman has it? A few people in the room shifted, uncertain where moral ground lay in a sentence like that. Naledi heard it too and pressed forward. I loved what you were becoming, she said. You were disciplined, brilliant, ruthless enough to win. I watched you waste years attached to old loyalty and emotional weakness. I thought if the past was cut away, you would finally become fully yourself. Tendai gave a small, broken laugh. Fully myself by becoming the kind of man who lets his children vanish? Naledi's expression hardened. You didn't know. That ignorance was your gift to me, he replied. Mama Thandi stepped in again, almost impatient now with the emotional messiness of confession. We made a decision, she said. A necessary one. And you benefited from it, whether you are man enough to admit it or not. That was the moment something cold and irreversible settled inside Tendai. He had spent the night moving through shock, guilt, recognition, and grief. But this calm defense of deliberate theft turned all of it into something cleaner. Not revenge, not yet, but moral separation. He looked at his mother and knew with devastating clarity that blood could continue while trust ended. Amina finally spoke. Mrs. Mbeki, Miss Dlamini, I strongly advise that you stop discussing details in a public setting and refrain from contacting any parties connected to this matter until formal counsel is present. Mama Thandi turned sharply. You advise me, Amina met her without flinching. Yes. The old woman almost smiled, but it was a terrible smile. You work for my son. I work for the law when it begins bleeding through a family. That ended it. Mama Thandi said nothing more. Tendai exhaled slowly, then turned to Amina. I want full document preservation orders. Company servers, household archives, driver logs, gate records, call histories where we can get them, foundation communications, private clinic connections, everything. Amina nodded once. I'll start tonight. And I want Kofi Mensah found before anyone warns him. Another nod. Understood. Then Tendai looked at Bekizizwe. Will you give a formal statement? The old man's shoulders lifted and settled with the weariness of someone finally laying down a burden that had grown heavier through silence. Yes. Mama Thandi made a small sound of contempt. After all these years you discover courage now. Bekizizwe's face tightened. No, madame. After all these years I discovered shame was heavier. Tendai turned away before anything else in him broke publicly. He should have stayed, controlled the room, managed the narrative, given instructions to staff, security, press handlers, sponsors. That was what the man he had become would once have done first. Instead, he walked out. Not toward the private elevator, not toward his suite, toward the side exit that opened onto the service corridor and then the underground drive where his cars waited. Amina followed, keeping pace without intrusion. When they reached the quieter corridor, she said, Where are you going? To my children. The words came out before he had time to think about them. Amina heard it. So did he. Neither mentioned it. They may not want you there tonight, she said carefully. I know. Then why go? He stopped walking for the first time. Because he needed to answer that honestly. Because for years he said, staring at the polished concrete floor, I have been a man who assumed pain would present itself to me clearly if it were real. That if something mattered enough, it would break through every wall around me. I used deception as an excuse not to ask harder questions, I let injury make me lazy. Amina was silent. Tendai continued, voice rougher now. If Kamo gets worse tonight, I refuse to be the man who learns about it tomorrow from a report. That seemed to satisfy her. She nodded. Go. I'll handle the beginning. He left the hotel in a black sedan without driver or escort. For once, he wanted no buffer between himself and consequence. Johannesburg at night moved around him in rivers of white headlights and red brake lights, fast food signs, taxi horns, and the blur of late traffic sliding under city glow. He had traveled these streets 1,000 times, but never like this. Never with the feeling that every turn was carrying him not toward a destination, but toward a reckoning, delayed by years. At a red light, he looked down at the copies of Yekamo's medical records on the passenger seat. Clinical terms, measurements, risk estimates. And between them, tucked almost carelessly inside the file, he found something else. A folded page from a child's exercise book. He opened it. The handwriting was careful but young. It was not addressed to anyone. It looked more like homework from a counseling session or school prompt. If I ever meet my father, I will ask him if he knew about us. If he says yes, I will know what kind of man he is. If he says no, I will ask why nobody loved us enough to tell him. The paper shook slightly in Tendai's hand. At the bottom, in smaller writing, one final sentence had been added later, perhaps on another day. I think my mother is tired of being brave all the time. Tendai closed his eyes, not in dramatic pain, in recognition. He had thought tonight's confrontation was about scandal, paternity, betrayal, legal consequences. All of that mattered. But under it was something simpler and more brutal. A woman had spent years carrying the weight of truth alone, until even her children could see the cost in her bones. And one of those children had started preparing for death before he had ever met his father. When Tendai reached the guest house in Rosebank, he sat in the parked car for several seconds without moving. The building was modest, clean enough from the outside, lit by tired security lamps, and bordered by clipped hedges trying to look more expensive than they were. A temporary place, a place for people in transit, not for families trying to breathe between disaster and decision. He finally got out and went inside. The receptionist looked up, recognized him instantly, then tried to hide it. I'm here to see Immaculate and Ndlovu, Tendai said. The woman hesitated. Sir, she asked not to be disturbed. Of course she had. He nodded slowly, absorbing the refusal without resentment, because he had earned it too. Before he could respond, a voice came from the staircase. You came anyway. Immaculate stood halfway down the stairs, one hand still on the railing. She had changed out of the ballroom dress into a simple dark sweater and long skirt. Without the bright lights and public armor, she looked even more tired and somehow more formidable. Tendai looked up at her. Yes, he said. For a long second, neither of them moved. Then Immaculate descended the rest of the stairs and stopped a few feet away. The children are asleep, she said. Kamo too. For now. Relief moved through him so sharply it almost weakened his knees. He nodded. I needed to know. Her eyes searched his face, measuring what had changed and what had not. And now that you know, she asked. Tendai took a breath. There was no polished answer worthy of the moment, so he chose the raw one. Now, he said, I start learning how to be useful to people I should have protected years ago. Immaculate did not soften, but neither did she turn away. And for that night, that was as close to mercy as he deserved. Immaculate did not invite Tendai upstairs. She stood in the small guest house lobby beneath tired yellow lights, one hand resting lightly on the strap of her bag, the other hanging at her side as if even stillness cost effort. Behind the reception desk, the young clerk lowered her eyes and pretended not to hear. Outside, a car door closed somewhere on the street. Inside, the old wall clock ticked with irritating calm. Tendai accepted the distance between them. He did not ask again to see the children. He did not insist that his money, his name, or his guilt entitled him to immediate access. That impulse still lived inside him, Wealth trains men to confuse urgency with permission. But tonight, he forced it down. "What does Kamo need first thing tomorrow?" he asked. Immaculate studied him for a moment, perhaps expecting performance. When none came, she answered plainly. "A repeat blood panel. A cardiac review. The surgeon in Durban wants updated imaging before they lock the operating date." She paused. "And he needs stability. Not a war around him." Tendai nodded. "Done." He took out his phone, then stopped and looked at her. "Will you send me the doctor's direct number, or would you rather make the call yourself while I listen?" That question mattered. Immaculate heard it. The old Tendai would have taken over. The new one, or perhaps the buried one returning, was asking where help ended and control began. "I'll make it," she said. "Good." For the first time that night, something in her expression eased. Not forgiveness, not trust, just the smallest release of tension in a woman who had been bracing for battle too long. Tendai inhaled slowly. "I've already started legal preservation. My engagement is over. Amina is securing records communications, gate logs, company archives, anything connected to the concealment. Pekizizwe agreed to give a statement." Immaculate's eyes sharpened at that. He spoke, "Yes." A flicker crossed her face, relief mixed with grief. He carried that in silence for years. So did you. She did not answer. The truth was too large and too obvious to need sound. Tendai continued quieter now. "My mother admitted enough in public to destroy whatever cover remained. Naledi did too, though less cleanly." Immaculate's mouth flattened, but there was no visible satisfaction in it. Only fatigue. Justice, she had learned, never arrived light. It always dragged wreckage with it. "And tomorrow?" she asked. "Tomorrow," he said, "I remove them from every part of my life they used to hide behind." Immaculate folded her arms. "That sounds strong. Be specific." So he was. "I'm freezing any discretionary access my mother has to company resources, staff, and legal contacts. Naledi is cut off from all internal systems events and family-linked entities. I'm instructing counsel to pursue the medical record, tampering the interception of communications coercion, and any financial trails that show paid interference. If Kofi Mensah ran even one false update or helped alter hospital records, I want him cornered before he has time to destroy anything else." Immaculate held his gaze through every word, testing whether he meant them or merely liked hearing himself say them. Then she asked the question that mattered more than the legal ones. "And your mother?" Tendai's jaw tightened. The answer did not come quickly. All night he had been moving toward it, but saying it out loud still felt like cutting through bone. "My mother," he said at last, "will face whatever consequences the law can reach, and whatever remains beyond the law." He paused. "She will face without my protection." The air between them changed, because that was not a public line. That was a son admitting a private death. Immaculate looked down briefly, then back up. "That will cost you." "It should." The answer landed cleanly. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then the receptionist coughed softly and looked away again. Life insisting on itself. Immaculate shifted her weight. "You should go." Tendai nodded, but did not move yet. "There's something else," he said. Her expression closed slightly. He chose his words with care, not because he was afraid of seeming weak, but because this moment did not belong to his need for relief. "I am not going to ask you to come back to me," he said. "Not now, maybe not ever. That is not a debt you owe, because the truth came out." Immaculate's eyes changed then just a little. He went on. "But I am asking for the chance to stand where I should have stood from the beginning. As Kamo's father. As their father. Even if they hate me for a while. Even if you do." A muscle moved in her cheek. The old wound was there, wide and living. Yet beneath it was something more dangerous than anger, the possibility of being moved by sincerity she had once trusted and then paid for with years of loneliness. "Children are not a redemption project," she said quietly. "I know. Loving them when you are shocked is easy. Loving them when they are angry, sick, afraid, and unconvinced when they do not reward you for trying, that is different. I know." "No," she said, and the pain in her voice rose at last. "You are only beginning to know." Tendai accepted that blow without defense. "Yes," he said, "I am." The honesty of it held. Immaculate looked at him for a long time, then nodded once toward the staircase. "Kama wakes early when the pain was bad the night before. If you come tomorrow, come in the morning, not like a visitor. Come ready to listen." Tendai swallowed. "I will." Only then did he leave. The next morning began without ceremony. Johannesburg woke under a pale gold sky washed clean by night wind. Traffic thickened. Vendors arranged fruit under striped awnings. Security guards traded greetings outside office towers. Radios spilled news and gospel and football talk into the streets. The world had not paused for private ruin. But inside the Mbeki estate, things had changed. Tendai arrived just after sunrise, not to sleep, not to recover, but to end illusions while they were still weak from exposure. Mama Thandi was in the breakfast room, already dressed, already composed, already preparing to resume control through routine. Silver tea service, pressed linen, morning papers untouched but arranged, the old theatre of dignity. When Tendai entered, she looked up and immediately understood from his face that there would be no negotiation. "My son number." He said it once and it stopped her. He remained standing. He did not sit at the table of his childhood. He did not accept tea. He did not perform the courtesy she had always used to blur the edge of her cruelty. "A legal team will contact you today," he said. "You will not use company staff drivers' records, officers, foundation resources, or private contacts in my name from this moment forward. Your house accounts remain intact for living expenses. Everything else is frozen." Her face went white with rage. "You dare!" "Yes, I am your mother, and they were my children yesterday too." The sentence cut the room in half. Mama Thandi rose slowly from her chair, dignity shaking now under something more primitive. "I did what weak men cannot do for themselves. I protected your future when you were blinded by emotion." Tendai looked at her, and for the first time in his life, saw no greatness in her strength. Only hunger. "You did not protect my future," he said. "You mutilated it." Her lips trembled, not with remorse but with fury at the loss of authority. "That woman filled your head overnight?" "No," Tendai replied. "She carried truth long enough for your lies to rot." He turned and left before she could answer. Naledi's removal was even colder. She had gone to her penthouse before dawn, perhaps thinking distance would restore strategy. It did not. By mid-morning her access cards were dead, her company-linked accounts under review, and Amina's office had delivered formal notice requesting preservation of all devices, messages, and communications relevant to the case. Naledi called 3 times. Tendai did not answer. On the 4th attempt, he sent one line: "Do not contact me except through counsel." Then he drove to the guest house. This time, when Immaculate opened the door to the family room upstairs, he was holding no flowers, no gifts, no dramatic symbols of repair. Only a pharmacy bag with prescribed pain medication the doctor had approved after their morning call, printed appointment confirmations, and a notebook. Kama was awake, curled under a thin blanket on the sofa. Thandiwe sat beside him, reading softly from a schoolbook. Zuri colored on the floor. Sibusiso stood near the window, wary but present. When Tendai stepped in, all 4 children looked at him. The moment was small. No music, no chandelier light, no witnesses to impress. And that was why it mattered. He crouched not too close. "Good morning," he said. No one answered at first. Then Zuri, after studying his face with the fearless seriousness of little children, asked, "Are you the man from the big room?" Immaculate, standing behind him, made a sound that was almost a laugh despite everything. Tendai looked at the little girl. "Yes?" Zuri considered this, then nodded as if filing him into the world at last. Kamo watched him with tired eyes. "Mama said you're coming to the doctor." "I am," Tendai said. Kamo was quiet a moment. "Will you still come if they use needles?" It was such a child question, so heartbreakingly ordinary, that Tendai felt his chest tighten. "Yes," he said, "especially then." Something passed over Kamo's face, uncertainty, hope, fear of hope. Then he gave the smallest nod. Sibusiso still did not smile. Thandiwe still did not trust easily. Immaculate still stood with one hand ready to steady anything that might fall apart. But no one asked him to leave. And in that fragile allowance, Tendai understood the shape of the future. Not restoration as fantasy. Not a sudden return to what had been stolen. Something slower. A fatherhood built from attendance, not claim. A love rebuilt through proof, not speech. A family not restored to innocence, but invited toward healing. That evening, after the hospital visit, after forms were signed and scans scheduled, and Kamo had fallen asleep with Zuri's drawing still tucked beside him, they sat around the small table in the guest house dining nook, eating simple food from mismatched plates. No one called it a new beginning. No one spoke of forgiveness. Yet when Zuri reached sleepily for the salt, and Tendai passed it before Immaculate could move, the little girl accepted it without thinking. And later, when Sibusiso rose to clear the table, Tendai stood too. For a second, the boy looked at him measuring. Then, without warmth, but without rejection, he handed him 2 plates. It was not love. It was not pardon. It was not even trust. But it was the first shared weight. And sometimes healing begins exactly there, not when the wound disappears, but when someone finally steps close enough to help carry what remains. After everything, the deepest wounds in life are often not caused by strangers. They are caused by the people who decide they know what is best for us, then use love as permission to control, erase, or deceive. That is why truth matters so much. Not because truth always arrives gently, but because a lie left in the dark does not stay. It grows. It reaches into children, into memory, into identity, and it makes innocent people pay for something they never chose. This story is a reminder that responsibility cannot begin only when proof becomes impossible to ignore. Real love asks harder questions. Real loyalty does not hide behind pride. And real healing is not found in pretending the past did not happen. It is found in facing it fully, naming the harm honestly, and then choosing day after day to become safer, kinder, and truer than the people who broke us. Immaculate did not heal because pain vanished. Tendai did not change because guilt was dramatic. Healing began because one woman stopped protecting a lie. One man finally chose truth over ego. Justice mattered. Consequences mattered. But what mattered most was what came after the patient work of showing up, listening, and carrying love as responsibility instead of possession. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments, do you believe some betrayals can truly be healed, or do they leave scars that never fully close? And if you want more emotional, powerful stories like this, subscribe and stay with the channel for the next journey.